Alright, today's lesson is going to be on VORs. A nice little device that we get to use to navigate ourselves through the sky. I'll give you a quick, so we're going to go through what the VOR is, how it works, and how we use it to navigate through the sky. So starting this off, we're going to show what the VOR receiver looks like and its parts. So here we've got our VOR receiver. Top window is where we read what our bearing is that we are signing up. So right now 045 radio for whatever. Down here we've got the knob, the OBS, Omni bearing selector. In the middle we have our CDI needle. It's the needle that shows our deflection of which direction we need to go in order to get on our bearing. We have our dots of deflection. Each dot represents 2 degrees. And then we have our to, from indicator representing if we're flying toward a VOR or away from the VOR. So these VORs, they give off signals. So we've got our VOR right here. They give off signals in all directions. There are 360 of them, and they're in a magnetic direction. That way we don't have to worry about changing any numbers or anything when trying to figure out our headings for matching up with the VOR. They're all in magnetic direction, and there are 360 of them, just like a compass rose. Now, something to keep in mind about the VOR and when it comes to the receiver is it has no idea what orientation the helicopter is in. So let's say, well, what I mean by that is we got our VOR here. Let's say we're going to line up on the 045 radio. So we're going to be somewhere down here. We got our 045 radio, and we are going to set up our VOR receiver to line up on this. So here's our VOR receiver, 045, and we are lined up with a 2 indication. Why is that? Why are we with a 2 indication? Well, it's because we are on this side of the VOR with the 045 radial dialed in. Well, right now we're on the reciprocal of the 045 radial, and the VOR has no idea if we are flying toward it, flying away from it, or flying perpendicular to it. To the VOR, we are just a little black box. Well, in this case, a green box. It has no idea, nor does it care at all. We are just a little point in space. So I'm going to ask you a question on it. So we're reading like this. We're positioned like this. Sitting on this, the reciprocal of the 045 radial. Is this how the VOR receiver is going to look? Alright, how about this? If we are sitting there flying away from the VOR, flying away from it, are we going to have a to indication or a from indication with the 045 radial dialed in? Same difference. The VOR does not know the orientation of the helicopter. All it knows is that we are somewhere along this radial, this bearing. It does not know our orientation. Are there any questions, or is this clear as mud? Clear as mud? Perfect. Alright, well, next we're going to go into the navigation of it. So we're going to be somewhere down here again. we've got our VOR up here, and Newberg VOR, let's say. So we are gonna want to fly directly to the Newberg VOR. What are the steps that need to be done in order to make this happen? Alright, so first off, we are going to want to tune into the frequency for the Newberg VOR. What is that? You got your sectional there so you can use it. So alright, well now it's a 1174. Alright, so we've got that tuned in. Now, in order to figure out if that VOR is working, what must we do? What is the one thing we need to do every time we tune in to a VOR? Gotta make sure it's the right one. So how do you do it? Turn the receiver to flip it to ID. After you've done that, crank up the volume and listen for what? Morse code. Yes. Once you have your Morse code, then you know you got the right VOR receiver, and go ahead and flip it back to normal and turn down the volume. So now that we know we're in the right setting, so we're going to tune our VOR receiver to the 045 radial. So we're going to let that one again. Fun number. We've got that here. So we're going to line up there. We're going to, once this line is setting, we're on the 045 radial. Dot, dot. Are we going to have a to or a from indication? To, yes. Why is it? It's because we are on this side of the VOR while tuned into the 045. So, any questions so far about how to set up a VOR, how to figure out how to fly to it, or the orientation? Alright, well then moving on. Let's say we fly past the VOR. So now we're going to be sitting over here. What is going to happen to the VOR receiver as we cross over the VOR? We are going to switch signs from a to indication to a from indication. Correct. Now something to keep in mind now after this, for when it comes to intercepting a radial, can be a little bit tricky depending on how you have your VOR set up. So I'm going to go through right now the different couple examples of what you have to do to make this happen. For starters, I'm going to explain it really quick. If you are flying to the station with a to indication, or away from the station with a from indication, you're going to want to fly towards the needle. And if you're going to be flying to the station with a from indication, or away from the station with a to indication, you want to fly away from the needle. So I'm going to give you a couple examples on this. So we're going to be right here. We're going to be set up, or actually first of all, being right here, how do you think this needle is going to be if we have a to indication flying to the station with a setup on 045? Is it going to be deflected to the left or to the right? Well, something to think about when you're doing this. We are on the right side of this radial. So which direction are we going to have to fly in order to get onto it? Fly to the left, right? So needle is going to be pointed to the left. We're going to want to fly to the left, flying toward the needle in order to intercept it. Now if we were flying with a from indication, So we're set up with a 225. On the 225 radial signed up, we're going to have a from indication. Since we're going to have a from indication flying to the station, which direction is this needle going to be pointed? Still being on this side of the radial, to the right. Remember, when you're flying to the station with a from indication, you're going to want to fly away from the needle. So in this case, we're on the right side of the radial. It's going to be deflected to the right. But since we have a from indication while flying to the station, we want to fly to the left in order to get onto it. Can be quite confusing. Any questions on this? None? Alright, well, now we're going to move on to testing, finding out how testing the VOR. VORs are a machine. They do fail. They can mess up, and they can have errors. There are test facilities all around the areas that you can find in your AFD for finding out whether your VOR is within accurate limitations or not. There are two types of tests. There are ground and air that you can do. So finding it in your local VOT test site in your AFD, you find out what your frequency is. You tune into that frequency, and there will be a particular spot on the airport that has that radio running through it, and you put your helicopter there and find out if your VOR is within limitation. On a ground facility, you can be plus or minus 4 degrees. In the air, you can be plus or minus 6 degrees. So you want to make sure this, whenever you do this, that you have your right facility or your right frequency tuned in. And remember, what do you do to make sure you're on the right one? That's right, ID, crank it up, check for Morse code, and then read on your VOR receiver to make sure it's within 4 or 6 degrees depending on which type you're going to be doing. So this is bringing our lesson to an end. Key points to remember: the VOR does not know the orientation of your aircraft. It has no idea which direction you are pointed or flying. It knows you are a point in space, and that is it. And remember, when you are intersecting a radial, flying to a station with a to indication or away from it with a from indication, you fly towards the needle. When you're flying to the station with a from indication or away from the station with a to indication, you fly away from the needle. Remember also, all radials are in a magnetic direction, and what must you do every single time you turn into a VOR, tune into it to use it? Make sure you identify by using the Morse code that you are using the correct and right VOR. Alright, that concludes today's lesson. I hope you learned something well.